May I, in the very beginning, thank the professor for that warm and generous, excessively generous introduction, and say as well how pleased I am to be in a university. I'm particularly delighted to be here at the University of São Paulo as part of my visit to Brazil. Insofar as you have made reference to my work for the Irish language, and also because of my respect for the importance of languages everywhere it is appropriate, that I begin in the Irish language. So let me say very briefly, Tó Fíorcin Óthasaram, Bheithin Seo Liv, San Alscail Seo, agus ach go háirithe go bhfuil sean sam Páipéir a Léamh, in áitina bhfuil an sí man sa bhfuil an obair cortha gló sna stadéire nehi éireannacha. Even started, agus leviel compro litriachta. May I immediately say how very grateful we are in Ireland that there has been an Irish Studies program here that goes back, as you know, more than 3 decades to 1980, and in a university that has achieved excellence in so many fields. And I'm delighted, therefore, to have the opportunity to visit and address this distinguished gathering. This evening's distinguished gathering as well includes our Irish community of São Paulo, and beyond, and to them, I extend a particular welcome. Marút Tránahén, as President of Ireland, Tó Fíorcin Fáilte Roimh Galéireachs Tá Áthasarm Castú Liúb. I think as well, it is the Irish population in Brazil. When I was invited to give this paper, I think that the Irish population in Brazil has never been very large in size, but the historical linkages between our two countries are, if not extensive, they're long-standing. And in their earliest form, they are of a religious, maybe, or military kind, with all the resonance of history written, and history yet to be revised, that this raises. I had the great privilege of discussing some of these issues, indeed at length, earlier today, with someone whom I've admired for a very long time, President Lula. To turn to the Irish connection, after accounts of the Jesuit Father Field, who came to Brazil in 1577, the records refer to 300 Irish soldiers in Portuguese military service in Brazil in 1604. These are, if you like, some of the quasi-voluntary component of Irish migration. Around the same time, in the Antilles, a mixture of indentured and forced Irish migration was unfolding in the Caribbean. So we Irish, as we project our minds back, had a presence not only in arms of competing colonizing powers, but also at times on their local oppositions, and in the succeeding acts of liberation, and the aftermath, where we often differed with each other. And after the church and the army came merchants, and we know that Irish tobacco planters like the O'Briens and Purcell brothers in the 1620s and 1630s traded in Brazil tobacco. They traded in dyes and hardwoods. Bernardo O'Brien from County Clare led a group in 1620 that built a wood and earthen fort on the north bank of the Amazon, and they became expert navigators of its maze of tributaries, canals and islands. We also know that several Irish soldiers served in Brazilian armies, including Diargo Nicolau Keating, Diargo Grady, and Jorge Cowan, and there was a Hibernian regiment in the Spanish army in southern Brazil at the end of the 18th century in 1777. So historians thus have a very rich terrain upon which to reflect in piecing together the motivations of these skilled soldiers and indeed the different settlers together. A story, for example, of some significance and particular poignancy is that of Colonel William Cotter's failed attempt to settle Irish emigrants in 1827. Cotter was sent to Ireland in 1826 to recruit a regiment for service against Argentina. He brought over 2,400 people from Cork in 1827 with the promise of a grant of land in return for 5 years' military service. However, the Irish were completely neglected, and being, of course, from Cork, they would have developed needs. But they arrived in Rio de Janeiro in 1828. They mutinied together with a German regiment, resulting in open warfare on the streets of Rio. Most were ultimately sent home or travelled in a primitive consular service sense. Some travelled on to Canada or Argentina, but some did stay to form a colony in the province of Bahia. Further colonization schemes were a failure, mainly due to poor preparation for the Irish immigrants' reception. The lack of agricultural tools, poor land, scarce water, and adjustment to the local diet. Many immigrants died and survivors moved on to other countries. Indeed, this stricture doesn't really apply to Bernardo Higgins, who had quite a knowledge of agricultural implements and of the technologies of agricultural production. But in his letters, he confesses to being one of his great disappointments that he was not able to establish an enduring settlement of Irish agricultural workers on his estates in southern Chile. An Irish migrant who did achieve some prominence in Brazil in the 19th century was William Scully, a journalist and businessman who became owner and editor of the Anglo-Brazilian Times of Rio de Janeiro in the early 1870s. That paper was published weekly for nearly 20 years, from 1865 to 1884. It was a tremendous achievement, and it is to his credit that he was a resolute campaigner for the ending of slavery in Brazil, which ended just 4 years after the paper ceased publication. Now, I had the opportunity, since my arrival in Sao Paulo, to look at an extraordinary fine piece of work, Journal number 12 of the Brazilian Journal of Irish Studies. I think that it is a particularly wonderful publication, commemorating as it does the centenary of Roger Casement's first voyage to the Amazon. Indeed, thinking of Roger Casement, that publication in 2010 and the recent publication of Mario Vargas Llosa's El Sueño del Celt, The Dream of the Celt, has reminded us all of the humanitarian work of that great Irishman. In 1910, Roger Casement, then a British consul in Brazil, investigated and reported on claims that a Peruvian company was carrying out atrocities against employees involved in collecting wild rubber. His discoveries were captured in a shocking report in which he related that 3/4 of the indigenous people of the area had been wiped out through the slave labor of the rubber industry. The journal is replete with splendid articles, as I have said, including Angus Mitchell's article, Roger Casement in Brazil, Rubber, the Amazon and the Atlantic World, 1884 to 1916. That article, drawing on the diaries, shows the evolution of a revolutionary sensibility in Roger Casement, and his drawing of comparisons, which are very interesting, between that which was being suffered by the American Indians and the Connemara Islanders, who at the time were suffering from typhus. We know the rest of the Casement story, his knighthood for his work here and earlier on similar issues in the Belgian Congo, and his embracing of the cause of Irish independence, which cost him his life in 1916. This rich history was brought to life by your Irish Studies team in a major academic conference in the northern city of Manaus in Amazonas in 2010. And this has been supplemented, as I know, by an exhibition here in the university on Casement's life and work. And as I've said, there has been a renewed interest by younger generations in Roger Casement, as I have said with the publication of Maria Vargas Llosa's El Sueño del Celt, with its subtle confrontation of the limited revolutionary content of such a nationalism as did not allow for sexual freedom or its contemplation. I had the pleasure of discussing this with Mario Vargas Llosa when he called to see me not so long ago at Orson Outubro. But in social terms, too, our connections are important. The most significant development in more recent years has been the major increase in Irish religious undertakings in Brazil. I understand that there are no less than 20 Irish religious military organizations working in Brazil. And these women and men are carrying on a fine Irish tradition of many years, where Irish people have answered the call to give of themselves to serve abroad, and particularly in their case, to place themselves among the poor and the disempowered in areas of poverty and deprivation, and to give service and to be part of the process of empowerment of those among whom they live, giving witness to and giving voice to those who, like the threatened indigenous people of our fragile planet where they live, or to those indeed who move on to cities in the hope of a new life and who live as migrants. So in the company of the minister and the delegation, it is important that based on such prior knowledge of each other, that Brazil and Ireland will in the years to come, as countries with solid democracies, promoting economic development, and with an enduring focus on social equality, that they should in the 21st century find common cause between them on so many levels and seek to deepen their mutual friendships. And it is my fervent wish and hope that as President of Ireland, my visit will assist in some way in this. Brazil and Ireland have so much to accomplish together in turning a depeopled global economy at the mercy of unaccountable markets into a peopled social economy of responsibility and with a real commitment to delivering sustainability. The capacity to make great changes, necessary changes, and the long struggle for the opportunity to do so has been a great achievement of the Brazilian people. And we too in Ireland have had to struggle for our right to have an independent view of ourselves and our relationships with Europe and the world. For Ireland has an old European and international connection. And this has helped, for example, our capacity to deliver over the years 6 Irish presidencies of the European Union, and it will be drawn upon again in the first half of the coming year, when Ireland assumes for the 7th time the presidency of the European Union. In no small part, that is one of the reasons I am in Brazil this week, but I am conscious of what Ireland can learn from the Brazilian experience. There is a great deal to admire, including the spectacular progress made by Brazil in reducing absolute poverty. Nowhere in the world has there been the progress which Brazil has made, nor in such a short period, in lifting millions, almost 28 million people in total, above the poverty line. And on the economy, the record is equally impressive, considering that in the 1990s, Brazil was heavily indebted, suffering from the highest inflation in the world, and today the country is free of debt, and currently the 6th largest global economy, with a gross domestic product of around $2.5 trillion. So when we in Ireland look at Brazil, we see much to admire and emulate. But we are conscious too of the imaginative response of Brazil to some capacity gaps that may be inhibiting further progress, such as those addressed by President Rousseff when she introduced the imaginative scholarship scheme, Ciência Sem Fronteiras. Like many of our European partners, we have engaged with this program and expect to welcome up to 1,500 Brazilian scholars to Ireland in the next few years. And in conversation with your rector, many outside of the sciences and the arts and humanities areas as well, thus contributing to filling such gaps and assisting the building of national capacity in Brazil, but also general scholarship, and at the same time creating a new network of people-to-people links between our two countries. So Ireland is much better known to Brazilians, of course, because each year 4,000 Brazilians choose Ireland already for further study, and more than 20,000 Brazilians have moved to Ireland, taking advantage of the growing economy. In the town of Cork in the west of Ireland, very near Yeats and Lady Gregory's Cool Park, 40% of the population of Cork is Brazilian. And they have brought to the west of Ireland a wonderful concept of carnival, I can tell you, particularly when at any time Brazil is playing football. The innovation and dynamism as well, which characterizes much of Brazilian industry, is contagious, and it is to be found among the Irish who have come here. A small number of Irish companies now have already a presence in the Brazilian market, such as the Irish food company Kerry, which has a factory in Campinas, Sao Paulo, and employs over 600 people. And I know that the Minister has been visiting other Irish companies in this afternoon. In seeking to deepen the cooperation and cultural links then between us, we need to know more of each other, exchange narratives and reflect together on world and scholarly issues that know no borders in time or space, and to constantly renew our versions of each other and ourselves. It is in this context that the Irish Studies program here assumes an importance that transcends the academic and the intellectual and has a wider significance. We are, I believe, on the brink of a great change. For example, already underway are changes in the versions of the social sciences. The challenge that is facing us now of reconnecting economy and ethics to philosophy, the ending of crude divisions between science, technology, and culture. All of these changes are already underway, and in the new integrated scholarship, Brazil and Ireland have much to achieve together in original work. The fascinating story of how Irish studies here, developed here, in this university, has been richly recounted by the founder of the centre, Professor Munira Mutran, in her publication of Sean Fuelon's Letters to Brazil. I've read that publication, and without the serendipity of that exchange of correspondence over almost 2 decades ago between a young PhD student and an aging Irish writer, reflecting on the life of a writer and contrasting the irreversible price of aging with all the energy, love, and promise of the younger scholar, we would not be here today. The letters are fascinating. They paint a picture of a relationship which began as an exchange between master and pupil, but very quickly evolved to one marked by genuine friendship and deep mutual respect. And let us remind ourselves that Aristotle, after all, said in the Nicomachean Ethics that the demands of friendship are greater than the demands of justice. And as it developed, this friendship began and flourished with the engagement of Professor Munira, and the University of São Paulo with Irish Studies developed and deepened. The University of São Paulo has offered a postgraduate course in Irish literature since 1977. And academic exchanges with Ireland date back to 1979. And the Brazilian Journal of Irish Studies was founded in this university in December 1989. So since 1999, with that publication, the Brazilian Journal of Irish Studies, edited by Professor Mutran and Professor Laura Izara, the association regularly organizes symposia that brings some of the major contemporary Irish writers to South America, and its publications have included contributions from people like John Banville, Colm Tobin, Sebastian Barry, of whom you've heard already, Michael Longley, the great Margaret McCurtain, of her work on women in history, Declan Kybad, my dear friend and fine critical scholar, and Fintan O'Toole. And I have to say that the Centre for Irish Studies, through them, was in touch with some of the most original and critical writing in relation to both Irish history and literary studies. It established linkages and secured support from the wider network of established Irish studies programs. For instance, Professor Maureen Murphy, from a stalwart of Irish studies in the United States, has been a regular visitor. Now, I've said already that I had the privilege of reading, thanks to the generosity of Professors Monira Mutran and Laura Izara, the issue 12 of November 2010 of the Brazilian Journal of Irish Studies. I read it last night. And I have to say I've already made reference to the splendid contribution of Angus Mitchell's treatment of indigeneity and Caseman's parallels, curiously, of Indian and Connemara life, the suffering of Indian people and the typhus that was at that time prevailing in the islands of Lettermore and Lettermullen. The William Butler Yeats Chair of Irish Studies, founded in 2009, and I understand that last August, the 7th annual Symposium of Irish Studies in South America was held in the city of Natal on the theme of representations of women in Irish culture. So I am very pleased that the Irish government has been funding the William Butler Yeats Chair of Irish Studies at the University of São Paulo, and has recently committed to do so for 3 more years. At a time of great budgetary difficulties, this commitment is a tribute to the quality of the centre, to your dedication and drive, the quality of the publications and the value that the Irish government and the Irish people places upon it. As President of Ireland, I welcome the annual celebration of Bloomsday, that day around which the novel of Ulysses revolves. James Joyce's achievement was to break the mold of the novel, and his work has yielded works of criticism of world significance, so many of them coming from South America. Like so many writers at this continent, he takes the importance of memory, remolds it, passes it through the filters of imagination in space, and breaks the mold of the novel. I have been told that for this year's Bloomsday, a large bookstore in Rio de Janeiro, clearly infected by what began here in this university, had a special promotion with a stand containing all of Joyce's work, both in Portuguese and English. The respect for writing, for culture and the arts, for their life-affirming and vindicating qualities, is a strong connection that we Irish and Brazilians share, and long may it last and may it deepen. And again, referring to that journal, when Alvaro Echeverri's splendid To Heal or to Remember, Indian memory of the rubber boom and Roger Casement's Basket of Life, Basket of Darkness, Basket of Life, is a beautiful piece of anthropology, and it is a wonderful exercise in the ethics of memory. I would put it with the work of the late Paul Ricoeur and of Richard Kearney in inviting us to look at that question of what can we choose never to forget, of what might we create an amnesty in memory for, so as to be able to live. And I think in dealing, as it were, with how young generations of indigenous people can handle the memory of ancestors, it is an extraordinary piece of work. Now, clearly things have come a long way from that first letter from Professor Mutran to Sean O'Fuelon. O'Fuelon himself once said, there is only one admirable form of the imagination that is so intense that it creates a new reality, that it makes things happen. So we are able to gather here today because of the power of the imagination and the building of new realities that came from within the walls of this institution and the instinct of friendship. I commend the university here for its enduring support for your work in developing that unique relationship between Ireland and Brazil, and bringing to Irish studies the exotic coloration which Brazil, as I have said, the home of Carnival, brings to all endeavours. I commend all those who, inspired by imagination, made things happen. Professor Mutran, who has been succeeded by the no less committed Professor Laura Ezara, and their entire dedicated team. I am delighted, particularly, that Professor Munir's pioneering work over 25 years was acknowledged by Ulster Náisiúnta here in the National University of Ireland in Maynooth, when it conferred on her an honorary doctorate of literature in 2008. So thinking about what inspired the creation and sustenance of an Irish Studies program in Brazil caused me to reflect more generally on the broader question of the legacy and challenge of Irish Studies in new conditions. Conditions which, I must be frank, are characterized by a sense of crisis in intellectual work and in the academy. In the social sciences, a perception that the old paradigms in economy and society have failed and are fading, being replaced by a yearning for renewal in our institutions and indeed in our identity, and in the way we teach the social sciences. In many respects, the multiplicity of efforts are creating forms of participation in South America, of balancing state and civil society and representative structures and movimentos, is much more advanced on this continent than elsewhere. And we in Europe have to learn to absorb that change and its significance. So perhaps we in Ireland, maybe we have a more accommodating sensibility because of our connection to achieve that than some others in Europe. Renewing Ireland, and with it our sense of what it means to be Irish and Irishness, is one of the most urgent challenges facing us at present. It is a challenge which encompasses and underpins economic renewal, but also which goes beyond it, reaching into the realms of academia and intellectual life. Those of us who value the importance of Irish studies, and in particular the importance of its accessibility in the wider Irish diaspora, owe a great debt of gratitude to scholars individually and through the work of their academic institutions for their work on Irishness. And it is interesting, too, that the new critical work in literature is often very much more incisive and developed than in the social sciences, which find it harder to break free into the needed originality of our position. For example, contrast the legacy of structural functionalism and a kind of empiricism without quality which prevailed in the social sciences on such subjects as migration, and contrast it with the literature and the studies of John McGaharon, or on any one of the exilic studies that have been taken on Ireland. So as to Irishness itself, as concept and reality, in May this year, I was delighted to give the third Thomas Flanagan lecture in New York on the subject of remembering and imagining Irishness. I was reminded most of all that Thomas Flanagan was the teacher who warned against any simplification of Irishness. He said, "My Irish-American identity is typical only in the sense that there is no such typical experience. Identity," he added, "is a personal matter, complex, slanted, and convoluted. In Ireland, we are not obsessed by the past, and we welcome our constant necessary revisions. And we are now once again on the threshold of centenaries of events that shaped Ireland for much of the past 100 years. In the next few years, we will mark the centenary of the start of the First World War and the events that led to the Easter Rising, the War of Independence, the Civil War. So these anniversaries are an opportunity for us, too, to reflect on our complex identities, but to do so in an authentic fashion, without any evasive fictions. So it seems to me that as the 20th century progressed, anxious at times for pragmatic assurances of stability, we sacrificed some of the powerful, emancipatory, egalitarian, and imaginative richness of the original independence to which we aspired, including, above all, its socially transformative potential. The writers of Ireland in exile mode have reminded us of this, reminded us not only of that, but of the enduring luminosity of the original Republican vision, a vision that knows no borders in its liberating tendency, in its humanity. The polarizing events of 100 years ago in Ireland had the effect in many respects of fixing and freezing national and religious identities for the decades that followed, in such a way that was exclusive and confrontational, narrowing our horizons. It is the recovery of and respect for the complexity of intellectual work that will set us free and offers us the best prospect in Irish studies at home and abroad. The Irishness that I believe is now emerging, even if not yet fully realized, is one that will be informed by the experience of the Irish abroad as much, or even to a greater extent, than it will be informed by those of us who live in Ireland. Distance grants perspective, and it is not accidental that so many of our most perceptive scholars chose the lens of temporary exile and our people of Ireland at once at home and abroad. And of course, this is something that we share with writers in South and Central America. That rich exilic experience where one is able to hold with both the legacy of its past and the promise of its future, a promise often betrayed. One is able to hold it steady to produce within the different modes a picture of one's people. And of course, if distance grants perspective, then you have a real advantage here in Sao Paulo, half a globe away from the object of study. We Irish, all of us, will be especially interested in the insights and new perspectives you bring to us through your valuable work. Indeed, on a number of occasions since my inauguration as Outubro and President of Ireland, I have suggested that it is not only from memory that the Irishness I speak about, that the Irishness of a new departure will come, but it will come from what is imagined as possibility and capable of being brought to fruition, respecting the frames of experience and values to which our words and policies are directed. I think in the end, at the end of life, one's memory is not of events that have actually only happened, but of all which has been imagined and all which was once considered as possible. Sedimented at the end of our lives in memory, is why we are left with, as it were, our possibilities, not only realized, but unrealized and imagined as well. And this will not be a new task or novel experience for Irish people. Ireland is not a society that has simply moved out of tradition into modernity. The false notion of modernization theory has been of really little value in Irish social studies. As scholars such as Declan Corbett have pointed out, Irish people have again and again been required to modernize, to adapt, to learn, to come through with such creativity as was necessary, so as to define and deal with that which was initially strange. Our stories are stories, as he says, with jagged endings. So this process of adaptation and modernization was a feature of the Irish migrant experience as they sought to accommodate the strangeness of their host environments. So we are in changing times in Ireland, in Europe, and the world. And I am very mindful today that my predecessor 8 years ago gave an address here in this university in March 2004 on the subject of EU enlargement and Ireland's experience in the EU. At that time, Ireland held the presidency of the EU as we were preparing to welcome 10 new countries to join the Union on the 1st of May 2004. It was a time of optimism when the EU was self-confident of its capabilities to further advance economic, social, and political progress. At that time, the word cohesion had equal status with the word competitiveness. Since then, optimism has, of course, been severely challenged by economic events, as the supposed rationality of the financial markets has been brutally exposed. A tension began indeed to emerge between accountable democracies faced with unacceptable levels of unemployment and unaccountable markets based on the rewards of speculation, and indeed in their derivation in an abuse of the concept of freedom itself, defined freedom as a freedom from the state or indeed any regulation with disastrous consequences. In the aftermath of that massive economic failure and its attendant human consequences, a certain version of Ireland which had prevailed briefly in our recent past must now be regarded as an aberration in our long history, and it must be replaced. That narrow version of Ireland, characterized as it was by an extreme and unrestrained individualism and an almost reverential approach to wealth for its own sake, is over. This version of Irish society was destructive at home, damaged our reputation abroad. It was an extraordinary hubris. It also fostered new forms of exclusion and inequality. And we are paying the human price of involuntary immigration as more of our young people feel impelled to immigrate in pursuit of employment opportunities, thereby once again renewing an historical experience of immigration that we had hoped had been consigned to the past. But there are highly educated people, more educated than any other country in the Eurozone, 10% more qualified graduates. And it is our hope that they will return, having helped other economies, and that they will come in time to build the Ireland of which they are a crucial part. And many are already choosing to stay and bringing us new forms of innovation, and they're also bringing new forms of social economy into being. We've had nearly 2 centuries now of researching and analysing the Irish migrations of the past, particularly since the post-famine period, and we owe much of this scholarship to American scholars. But our Irish history, our collective memory, is scarred by immigration and its sense of loss, as is our song tradition. Separation, missed opportunities. And even if there has been a rich literary harvest enjoyed not only at home, but at global level, it has been a loss of people. The subject of migration has interested myself throughout my academic and political career. And I believe that our migratory experiences should, to us, be a great moral and empowering strength, continually reminding us that the appropriate human rights that attach to each person, from the fact of simply being human and alive, should never be diminished by the necessity or the decision to move, should never be curtailed, limited, or made conditional on either being sedentary or the owner of property. In the end, as I have said already, we are all simply migrants in time, curious, creative, and vulnerable in an interdependent world that is always on the edge of new possibilities yet to be realized. And now I conclude by saying again, we are indeed at the cusp of great changes. We face, on the one hand, the challenge of accepting mutely and passively the impact of such a homogenization in culture as would define us as consumers, passively consumed in our consumption, or alternatively, of using science and technology to assist us in making a rich tapestry from the threads of cultures, of things ancient and things yet to be imagined. And Irish Studies I see as a loom to such a project as we'll release. Not only our curiosity or our voyeurism as to what is different, as Edward Said would have it, an exotic experience for a transient moment. Irish Studies can open our Irishness out to the world in all its wonder, its misery, its cruelty, and its unquenchable impulse to an ethical humanity without borders. Derek Mahan, a close friend of Tom Flanagan's in New York, wrote recently about the need to renew values in an Ireland that has seen excess. It's time now to go back at last, beyond irony and slick depreciation, past hedge and fencing to a clearer vision. Time to create a future from the past. I believe we are at such a point of renewal. It is a great challenge, renewing Ireland and also renewing the sense of what it means to be Irish after the events of recent years. and those outside Ireland who share a sense of Irishness, including all those who are teachers or students of Irish studies abroad, are vital to that process. As President, I've made it a priority to strengthen and deepen all strands of our international connections to the global Irish family. That inclusive version of Irishness is in its turn but a strand in our common shared human existence. Such a global approach as might include all our histories, peoples, narratives, and scholarships. Charles Darwin wrote about the need to see beyond ourselves. As man advances in civilization and small tribes are united into larger communities, the simplest reason would tell each individual that he or she ought to extend his social instincts and sympathies to all the members of the same nation, though personally unknown to him. This point being reached, there is only an artificial barrier to prevent his sympathies extending to the men of all nations and races. Now more than ever, we need to widen our perspective, leave behind all aggressive individualism, and move in international solidarity towards a more generous form of inclusion. We need to work together to imagine anew such values and ideals as will create something new, emancipatory, and transformative. And I was privileged to discuss these ideas with President Lula earlier today. The local Irish community, of course, mar focal skergus concrete to finish. It is estimated at about 1,000. And I'm well aware that there is no big Irish diaspora here, no great hyphenated Irish community that will endow from the riches of commerce what is going on or to provide funding or support its academics and furnish its student base as prevails in some parts of North America. Rather, it is as if one had happened on an oasis of learning, sustained by a small dedicated group from within South America, who pursue the study of Irish literature purely on its own inherent merits. And may God bless them for that. This makes Irish studies here in this university a special, precious, and wonderful in its achievements, and even more so for its promise. Wonderful in its achievements, as I have said. There's something different, unique, colourful, and even exotic, let me use Said's word, about an academic programme which is Irish Studies in Brazil. I sincerely hope that this Centre for Irish Studies will continue to strengthen and grow. It has already great achievements in what it has published. You are like a beacon whose light gives us all hope and courage. It was George Bernard Shaw who said, "Do not follow where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." And you are doing that. Agus guim gach banach der onirati. And to the Irish gathered here this evening, ma co erinig atoilioha. My wife Sabine and I look forward to meeting you and hearing your stories. Muila bikas asod goluder in Shah. And finally, if the story is about a people who scatter, and we do, and we have, it is also right that they should gather. And next year, in 2013, Ireland will host the Gathering, a great bringing together of Irish people and friends of Ireland in a year-long celebration of all that is best in Irish tradition and identity and imagination. And may I, as President of Ireland, invite you all to come to Ireland and celebrate with us and think with us, and let us all think together about our shared vulnerable planet and its people, and how to make it a space of fully inclusive humanity. Garamila Mahaji, thank you.